She wasn't asleep. She was testing him. At 2 in the morning on the 48th floor, CEO, Oliver Hart sat motionless in her chair with her eyes closed and a secret glowing on the monitor in front of her. When the door opened, the man who walked in wasn't an executive. He was a night shift janitor named Darius Cole. And Oliver wanted to know one thing: when no one was watching, what would this man do? What would you do if you saw something you weren't supposed to see? Something that could save a company or destroy your entire life? Would you speak up, or would you walk away before you answer? Listen to this story. Because the man at the center of it had a daughter to feed, rent to pay, and every reason in the world to stay silent. Oliver Hart had built Apex Nova from a 2-person startup in a rented garage into one of the most respected cybersecurity firms in the country. 15 years of sleepless nights, calculated risks, and an almost supernatural instinct for digital threats had turned her company into a billion-dollar empire. Fortune had profiled her twice. The Pentagon had her on speed dial. And for a long time, she believed that the people standing beside her had earned their place. But over the past 18 months, something had gone wrong. It started with the Kessler-Brandt contract, a $400 million deal with a European defense consortium that Apex Nova had spent nearly a year developing. The proposal was airtight, the pitch flawless, and Oliver had personally overseen every detail. 2 days before the final presentation, Ridgecore Solutions, a competing firm half the size of Apex Nova, submitted a counteroffer that mirrored their proposal almost line by line. Kessler-Brandt went with Ridgecore. Then came the Nakamura Industries deal. Then the Transatlantic Group partnership. One by one, contracts that should have been theirs slipped away to the same competitor each time with an eerie precision that went beyond coincidence. The board of directors grew restless. Revenue dropped by 37% in 12 months. Layoffs swept through the lower floors. And in the executive conference room, whispers about bankruptcy grew louder with each quarterly report. Oliver knew what the board didn't want to say out loud, that someone inside Apex Nova was feeding information to Ridgecore. She had suspected it for months, lying awake at night, running through names and faces, trying to match motive with opportunity. But she had no proof, no digital fingerprint, no confession, just a gut feeling that gnawed at her like a slow poison. She couldn't go to the FBI herself, not yet. If she was wrong, the accusation would destroy the company faster than any leak. And if she was right, she needed the evidence to come from a source outside the executive circle. If Oliver reported her own COO based on an access log she had pulled up herself, Carlos could claim she had fabricated the data to deflect blame for the company's decline. The board would fracture, lawyers would circle, and the real crime would disappear under a mountain of internal politics. She needed someone independent to see the truth and act on it, someone with no agenda, no corporate loyalty to protect, and no reason to lie. And the worst part, the part that kept her staring at the ceiling long after midnight, was the growing certainty that the traitor was someone who had been beside her from the very beginning. 48 floors below where Oliver sat in the dark, Darius Cole pushed a cleaning cart through the service entrance of Apex Nova's lobby at 9:15 every night. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered with hands that were built for something more precise than mopping floors. And 3 years ago they had been. Before the cleaning cart, before the blue coveralls with his name stitched above the pocket, Darius had been a cybersecurity technician at a mid-sized firm in Arlington. He was good at it, not just competent, but gifted. The kind of mind that could read a network breach the way a cardiologist reads an EKG, spotting irregular rhythms in data flows that others dismissed as noise. His supervisor once told him he had a future in the field that most people could only dream about. Then Sarah got sick. His wife's diagnosis came on a Tuesday, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 8 months. She lasted 6. In those 6 months, Darius burned through their savings on treatments, drove her to every appointment, held her hand through every round of chemotherapy, and watched the woman he loved disappear a little more each day. When she died, he was left with an empty house, $62,000 in medical debt, and a little girl who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. He couldn't function. The grief hit him like a wall, and behind that wall was nothing. No motivation, no ambition, no desire to sit behind a screen and hunt invisible threats while his daughter grew up without him. So he quit, walked away from cybersecurity entirely, took the night shift janitor position at Apex Nova because it paid enough to cover rent, and because it let him be home during the day when Zoe needed him. It wasn't the life anyone would have predicted for him, but it was the life he chose. On the evening before everything changed, Darius picked Zoe up from his mother-in-law's house on Maple Street. Gloria Sarah's mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching Zoe run down the front steps with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "She already ate," Gloria said. "Made her do her reading homework, too." "Thank you, Gloria. I owe you." "You owe me nothing. You owe that little girl a good life. That's all the payment I need." Darius nodded. He knew what Gloria meant, and he knew she meant it with love, even when her voice carried an edge. She had never quite forgiven him for leaving the tech industry for choosing a mop over a career that could have given Zoe more. But she never pushed too hard, because she also understood what losing Sarah had done to him. In the car, Zoe sat in the back seat with her knees pulled up watching the streetlights pass. "Daddy, how come you work at nighttime?" Darius glanced in the rearview mirror. "Because that's when they need me, baby." "But all the other kids' dads are home at night. Tommy's dad coaches his baseball team. And Lily's dad reads to her every night before bed." Darius tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had rehearsed answers to this question a dozen times, but none of them ever felt sufficient. "I work at night so I can be with you during the day," he said. "So I can walk you to school. So I can make you pancakes on Saturday mornings. Some dads do it differently, but this is how I do it. And I'm always going to be here for you, Zoe, always." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing circles on the window glass. "I don't need a big house, Daddy," she said softly. "I just need you." Darius felt something crack open in his chest, not pain exactly, but something close to it. The kind of ache that comes from being loved more than you think you deserve. "You got me, baby girl," he said. "You always got me." He carried that sentence with him when he got home and waited for Gloria to arrive for the night. She came at 8:30, the same as always, letting herself in with the spare key and settling into the armchair with her reading glasses and a crossword puzzle. Darius kissed Zoe goodnight, grabbed his jacket, and drove to Apex Nova. He carried those words through the parking garage, through the service elevator, through the first 4 hours of vacuuming and emptying trash cans in a building full of offices that belonged to people who would never know his name. And he was still carrying them at 2 in the morning when his cleaning cart reached the 48th floor. The executive floor was always the last stop on his route. Most nights it was deserted, just dark hallways and locked doors and the faint hum of servers running behind walls. But tonight, as Darius pushed through the glass doors of the CEO's suite, he noticed the light. It was faint, the pale blue glow of a monitor cutting through the darkness of the corner office. And there behind the desk sat a woman in a charcoal blazer, her head tilted slightly to one side, her eyes closed. Oliver Hart. Darius had seen her before in the elevator in the lobby, once in the parking garage. She had never looked at him, not once. He was invisible to her just as he was invisible to everyone in this building who wore a badge above the 4th floor. He should have turned around. He should have backed his cart out quietly and come back in 20 minutes. That was the protocol: never disturb an executive, especially not the CEO. But the monitor was right there, open, glowing. And something on the screen snagged his attention the way a fishhook snags a lip-sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. It was a system access log. Hundreds of lines of data showing file downloads, classified files, strategy documents, client proposals, all pulled from Apex Nova's secure servers between 1 and 4 in the morning, night after night, for months. The timestamp stretched back over a year, and every single download was traced to one account, Carlos Hale, Chief Operating Officer. The old instincts hit Darius like a wave. 3 years of pushing them down, of pretending they didn't exist, and here they were alive and screaming. He knew exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't an employee working late. This was a systematic, long-term data theft operation, and whoever was behind it had been bleeding Apex Nova dry from the inside. His heart hammered. His eyes flicked to Oliver, still motionless in her chair, breathing slow and even. He should leave. He should absolutely leave. He was a janitor. This wasn't his problem. Getting involved could cost him his job, his income, his ability to put food on the table for Zoe. He thought about her face in the rearview mirror, her voice saying, "I just need you," and every survival instinct he had told him to walk away. But he didn't. Darius pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands were steady, steadier than he expected. He angled the screen carefully, making sure the flash was off, and took 6 photographs of the access log capturing every detail. Then he put the phone away, backed his cart out of the office, and closed the door behind him without a sound. What Darius didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Oliver Hart's eyes had opened the moment the door clicked shut. She had not been asleep. She had never been asleep. For the past 3 weeks, Oliver had been running her own private test. Every night she left the access log open on her screen, settled into her chair, and waited to see who would come through the door and what they would do when they saw it. Executives had come and gone. Some glanced at the screen and looked away. Some didn't notice at all, and one had actually closed the monitor without reading a word. No one had acted until tonight. Oliver reached for her desk phone and dialed the head of building security. "Pull the camera footage from my office," she said quietly. "Last 30 minutes. I want a name and a full employee file on my desk by morning." She already knew the name, but she wanted to know everything else. Darius didn't sleep that morning. He lay on the couch in the small apartment on Ridgefield Avenue, with the curtains drawn, his phone resting on his chest like a grenade with the pin half pulled. The photographs were still there, 6 images of a screen that proved someone at the top of Apex Nova had been gutting the company from the inside. He had looked at them 11 times since getting home. Each time the data told him the same story. Carlos Hale, Chief Operating Officer, hundreds of classified files downloaded in the dead of night over the span of more than a year. From the hallway, he could hear Zoe breathing in her sleep, slow, even, trusting. The sound of a child who believed the world was safe because her father was in the next room. Darius pressed his palms against his eyes. He wasn't a whistleblower. He wasn't an investigator. He was a man who mopped floors for $14.60 an hour, so his daughter could have a roof and 3 meals a day. Every instinct he had said to delete the photographs, go to work tomorrow night, and pretend he had never seen that screen. But there was another voice, quieter, older, buried beneath 3 years of grief and survival, that wouldn't stop talking. It was the voice of the man he used to be. The technician who understood that data theft on this scale wasn't just a corporate problem. It was the kind of thing that destroyed companies, wiped out retirement accounts, and put hundreds of people out of work. People like him. People who couldn't afford to lose a paycheck. By 7 in the morning, he made a decision, not the final one, but a step. He picked up his phone and called Ray Whitfield. Ray had been his closest friend at the firm in Arlington. They had started the same week, shared a cubicle wall for 2 years, and spent their lunch breaks arguing about college football and encryption algorithms with equal intensity. When Darius left the industry after Sarah's death, Ray was the only colleague who kept calling. For a while, at least. The calls had thinned out over the past year, but the number still worked. Ray picked up on the 4th ring, his voice groggy. "D, that you?" "Yeah. I need a favor. It's 7 in the morning, man. I know. It's important. Something in Darius's tone must have registered because Ray's voice shifted. All right, talk to me. Darius explained what he had found carefully without naming the company, though Ray was smart enough to figure it out. He sent 3 of the 6 photographs over an encrypted messaging app and waited while Ray examined them. The silence on the other end lasted almost 2 full minutes. When Ray finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of sleepiness. Darius, this is bad. This isn't some employee sneaking files onto a thumb drive. This is organized, systematic. Whoever set this up built a pipeline, scheduled downloads during off-peak hours, rotating access points, layered permissions to mask the origin. This has been running for months, maybe longer. That's what I thought. You said this is a COO-level account. Yes. Ray let out a long breath. Then you're looking at someone with full administrative access to every system in the building. This person doesn't just have the keys, they built the locks. Darius felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. So what do I do? The line went quiet again. When Ray came back, his voice was different, lower, tighter, wrapped in something that sounded a lot like fear. You delete those photos. Tonight. And you never mention this to anyone. Darius pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it as if the device itself had betrayed him. Ray. Listen to me. Ray's words came fast, now urgent. I know who Carlos Hale is. He sits on 2 industry advisory boards. He has connections at the Department of Defense. If he finds out a night shift janitor is sitting on evidence against him, you won't just lose your job, Darius. He'll come after you with lawyers you can't afford to fight. He'll bury you. And I have a wife. I have 2 kids in school. I can't be part of this. I'm not asking you to be part of anything. I'm asking you what this data means. And I just told you. Now I'm telling you to walk away. Ray's voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, Dee. I really am. But this isn't our fight. The call ended, and Darius sat in the quiet of his living room holding a phone full of evidence and absolutely no one to share it with. He went through the motions of the day like a man walking through fog, made breakfast for Zoe, walked her to school, came home and tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the access log scrolling down that screen line after line of stolen files, each one a piece of a company being hollowed out from the inside. That evening, he dropped Zoe at Gloria's and drove to Apex Nova for his shift. The building looked the same as it always did, a glass tower glowing against the night sky full of offices where important people made important decisions. Darius parked in the service lot, swiped his badge, and pushed his cart through the lobby. He was on the 22nd floor, emptying the recycling bins in the east wing when the elevator chimed behind him. The doors slid open and Carlos Hale stepped out. Darius had seen Carlos before, always from a distance, always in passing. A tall man in his early 50s with silver-gray hair, combed back from a broad forehead, wearing suits that cost more than Darius made in a month. He moved through the building the way all senior executives moved, with the casual certainty of someone who believed every door would open for him. But tonight Carlos wasn't passing through. He stopped. You work this floor. Darius kept his hands on the recycling bin. Steady. Yes, sir. 20 through 28. Carlos studied him. The look wasn't hostile, not exactly. It was the kind of look a man gives a piece of furniture he doesn't remember buying. Evaluating. Measuring. What's your name? Darius Cole. How long have you been with us, Darius? About 2.5 years, sir. Carlos nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Darius's face. Night shift the whole time. Yes, sir. Must be tough. You got a family? A daughter. Carlos slid his hands into his pockets. A daughter. That's nice. Kids keep you honest, don't they? He held Darius's gaze for a moment longer, a moment that stretched like a wire being pulled taut, and then turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. The doors closed. The floor number climbed, and Darius stood alone in the hallway with his heart slamming against his ribs. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists and pressed them against his thighs until the trembling stopped. In 2.5 years, Carlos Hale had never once acknowledged him, had never acknowledged any custodial worker that Darius had seen, which meant something had changed. Maybe Carlos had reviewed the security footage. Maybe he had noticed that someone lingered too long outside the CEO's office. Maybe the question about family wasn't casual. Maybe it was a warning. Or maybe Darius was being paranoid. Maybe it meant nothing. But the look in Carlos's eyes, that cold, calculating inventory of a man cataloging a potential threat, told Darius everything he needed to know. He wasn't invisible anymore. While Darius pushed his cart through the darkened hallways that night, Oliver Hart sat in her home office 12 miles away, staring at a security report that confirmed what she had already suspected. The employee file was thin. Darius Cole. Night shift custodial staff. Hired 2.5 years ago. No disciplinary record, no complaints. A ghost in the system, the kind of employee whose badge scanned in and out every night without ever triggering a single flag. But the camera footage told a different story. Oliver watched it 3 times. Darius entering her office with his cart, stopping when he saw the screen. The shift in his posture subtle but unmistakable as recognition hit. And then the phone. 6 photographs taken carefully, methodically, with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. She leaned back in her chair. For 3 weeks she had run this test. She had left that access log open on her screen like bait on a hook, waiting to see who would bite. Senior analysts had walked past it. 2 vice presidents had been in her office for late meetings and hadn't even glanced at the monitor. Her own chief of staff had come in to drop off a briefing folder and left without noticing. And then a janitor, a man who had no obligation to this company beyond pushing a cleaning cart. A man with a daughter to feed and rent to pay and every reason in the world to mind his own business. And he did the thing that none of them were willing to do. He looked, he understood, and he acted. Oliver pulled up the rest of his file. Prior employment cybersecurity technician, 4 years at a firm in Arlington. Reason for departure personal. Emergency contact Gloria Simmons' mother-in-law. Dependents 1 daughter. She closed the file and stared at the wall for a long time. For months she had been drowning in suspicion, unable to trust her board, her executives, or even her own judgment. She had built Apex Nova with Carlos Hale at her side from the very beginning. He was the first person she hired, the first name on the company charter, the man who had talked her through every crisis and celebrated every victory for 15 years. The idea that he had been selling her out systematically, deliberately for money wasn't just a business problem. It was a wound that went deeper than any balance sheet could measure. And now the proof she needed wasn't coming from a forensic audit team or a corporate investigator. It was sitting in the phone of a man who cleaned her office at 2 in the morning. Oliver closed her laptop and made a decision of her own. She would wait. She would watch. And she would see what Darius Cole did next. 2 days passed. Darius went to work, came home, picked Zoe up from school, made dinner, read her a chapter of the book they were working through, a story about a girl who sailed across the ocean in a boat made of paper. Zoe loved it. She said she wanted to build a paper boat and sail to an island where dogs could talk. Darius told her that sounded like a solid plan. On the second evening, he was sitting at the kitchen table going over bills when Zoe came out of her room carrying a piece of paper. "I made this for you, Daddy." She held it up. It was a crayon drawing 2 stick figures standing in front of a small house with a red door. One figure was tall with brown skin and big hands. The other was smaller with 2 pigtails and a bright yellow dress. Above the house she had drawn a sun with a smiley face, and at the bottom, in uneven letters that tilted slightly to the right, she had written, "Daddy is the best." Darius took the drawing from her. He looked at it for a long time, at the crooked little house, the oversized sun, the 2 figures standing side by side, as if nothing in the world could separate them. "You like it?" Zoe asked. "I love it, baby. I'm putting this on the fridge. She grinned and ran back to her room satisfied. Darius stayed at the table holding the drawing with both hands and felt the full weight of his situation pressed down on him like a hand against his chest. If he came forward, he could lose his job. If he lost his job, he couldn't pay rent. If he couldn't pay rent, the life he had built for Zoe, small and fragile as it was, would come apart. Ray was right. This wasn't his fight. He owed nothing to Apex Nova, nothing to Oliver Hart, and nothing to the hundreds of employees who didn't know their company was being eaten alive from the inside. But he owed something to himself. And he owed something to the man his daughter believed he was the tall figure in the crayon drawing standing beside her like a wall between her and the rest of the world. If he deleted those photographs and walked away, he would be safe. But he would know. Every time Zoe looked at him, every time she called him the best, he would know that he had seen something wrong and chosen to do nothing. That night, after putting Zoe to bed, Darius sat at the kitchen table and typed an anonymous report to the FBI's cybercrime division. He attached all 6 photographs, described what the data showed, and identified the account holder by name and title. He read the report 3 times, changed 2 sentences, and hit send before he could talk himself out of it. Then he put his phone in the kitchen drawer, went to the bathroom, and washed his face with cold water. His hands had stopped shaking. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 the following morning. Oliver arrived at Apex Nova at 7:30. The bankruptcy filing sat in a leather folder at the center of the conference table, 47 pages of legal language that would dissolve everything she had spent 15 years building. The board members filed in one by one, most of them avoiding her eyes. They had already made up their minds. In their view, the numbers told the whole story, and the story was over. Carlos Hale arrived at 8:55, 5 minutes before the meeting was set to begin. He wore a navy suit and a red tie, and he carried himself with the quiet composure of a man who had already won. He took his seat at the far end of the table, folded his hands, and offered Oliver a sympathetic nod, the kind of nod a pallbearer gives at a funeral. Oliver returned the nod. She said nothing. She had received a confirmation through her own channels late the previous night. The FBI had received an anonymous tip. An investigation was being opened. Agents were being dispatched. But she didn't know when they would arrive. It could be today. It could be next week. And if it was next week, the document in front of her would already be signed and Apex Nova would already be dead. The board chair, a silver-haired man named Richard Graves, opened the meeting with a brief statement about the company's financial position. Oliver listened without expression. When Graves finished, he turned to her. "Oliver, the filing is ready for your signature, unless there's something you'd like to add." Carlos leaned forward. "I think we've been through this enough times. The numbers are clear. The sooner we move forward, the sooner we can begin an orderly wind down." Oliver picked up the folder and opened it slowly. "Before I sign, I'd like our counsel to walk me through the indemnification clause on page 31. I want to make sure I understand the personal liability implications for each board member." The company's attorney, a woman named Patricia Shelton, blinked in surprise. "That clause is standard language, Oliver. We reviewed it last. I'd like to hear it again." Patricia glanced at Graves, who shrugged. She began reading the clause aloud. Carlos shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped the table once, a small, involuntary gesture that Oliver caught from the corner of her eye. When Patricia finished, Oliver asked about the non-compete provisions on page 38. Then she asked about the asset liquidation timeline on page 42. Each question was precise, each one reasonable on its own, and each one bought another 5 minutes. Carlos's composure began to thin. "Oliver, we've had months to review this document. Every clause has been vetted by 3 separate legal teams. I don't see the value in—" "I'm about to end my company, Carlos." Oliver's voice was calm and even. "I think I'm entitled to read every word before I do." The room fell silent. Graves cleared his throat. Patricia shuffled her papers. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Carlos checked his watch twice. Oliver continued asking questions, methodical, unhurried, each one delivered with the steady patience of a woman who had learned long ago that the most powerful thing in any room is the person willing to wait. At 9:47, she picked up the pen. She placed the tip against the signature line on page 47. Her hand was steady. The door to the conference room opened. 3 men in dark suits walked in. The one in front held up a badge. FBI, we're looking for Carlos Hale. Every head in the room turned. Carlos stood up from his chair, not quickly, but with the rigid mechanical motion of a man whose body was moving before his mind could stop it. His face had gone the color of wet concrete. Carlos Hale, you are the subject of a federal investigation into corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. We need you to come with us. The conference room was absolutely still. No one spoke. No one moved. The bankruptcy filing sat open on the table, unsigned, the pen resting beside it like a discarded weapon. Oliver set the pen down. She closed the folder. And for the first time in 18 months, the knot that had been coiled in her chest since the day the Kessler-Brandt contract disappeared finally began to loosen. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply folded her hands on the table and watched Carlos Hale walk out of the room between 2 federal agents, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor until the sound faded into nothing. The federal investigation moved quickly. Within 72 hours of Carlos Hale's removal from the Apex Nova conference room, a forensic team from the FBI's cybercrime division had seized his office computer, his personal laptop, and 3 encrypted external drives found in a safe deposit box registered under his wife's maiden name. The evidence was overwhelming. Over the course of 14 months, Carlos had systematically downloaded more than 300 classified documents, client proposals, proprietary algorithms, internal pricing strategies, and defense contract specifications, and transmitted them to a shell company that traced back to Ridgecore Solutions. The pipeline Ray had described on the phone was even more sophisticated than Darius had imagined. Carlos had built layered access protocols that masked his downloads as routine system maintenance, routed the transfers through a series of offshore servers, and timed every extraction for the window between 1 and 4 in the morning, when network monitoring was at its lowest. He had been meticulous. He had been patient. And he had been doing it right under Oliver's nose since before the Kessler-Brandt contract disappeared. The motive was simple. Ridgecore had offered Carlos $12 million paid in quarterly installments to an offshore account in exchange for a steady stream of Apex Nova's most sensitive intellectual property. Carlos had accepted, not because he needed the money, but because he believed he deserved it. 15 years of standing in Oliver's shadow, 15 years of watching her name appear on magazine covers while he managed the machinery behind the curtain, had calcified into a resentment so deep that betrayal felt not like a crime but like compensation. When the full scope of the theft became public, Apex Nova's legal team filed a civil suit against Ridgecore for corporate espionage, misappropriation of trade secrets, and tortious interference with business relationships. The case never went to trial. Ridgecore settled within 6 weeks for an undisclosed amount, and 3 of the contracts that had been lost, including Kessler-Brandt, returned to Apex Nova before the end of the quarter. The bleeding stopped. The company began to breathe again. 3 weeks after the FB, I walked Carlos Hale out of the building. Oliver Hart took the elevator to the basement. She had never been to the maintenance level before. The hallway was narrow and lit by fluorescent tubes that buzzed faintly overhead. The walls were unpainted concrete, and the air carried the chemical smell of industrial cleaning supplies. It was a different world from the 48th floor. No glass walls, no panoramic views, no imported furniture. Just utility. Just function. She found Darius in the supply room at the end of the hall, restocking his cart for the night shift. He was wearing his blue coveralls with his name stitched above the pocket, arranging bottles of disinfectant on the lower shelf with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done the same task 1,000 times. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Oliver stood there in her black blazer and heels, framed against the concrete hallway like a figure from a different universe, which in every measurable way she was. "Mr. Cole." "Ma'am." "Do you know who I am?" Darius set down the bottle in his hand. "You're the CEO." Oliver stepped into the room. "I need to tell you something, and I'd like you to hear all of it before you respond." Darius straightened up and waited. 3 weeks ago, you came into my office at 2 in the morning to clean. You saw my monitor displaying a system access log. You recognized what it meant that someone in senior leadership had been stealing classified data. And instead of walking away, you took photographs of that log. Darius's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted a flicker of recognition that the ground beneath him had just moved. "What you didn't know," Oliver continued, "is that I was awake. I had been awake every night for 3 weeks running that same test. I left the log on my screen deliberately. I wanted to see who in this building would notice and what they would do about it." She took another step closer. Executives walked through that office, analysts, vice presidents, people who are paid to identify threats. Not one of them acted. Some of them looked right at the screen and kept walking. One of them closed the monitor without reading a single line. Oliver's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, a current of emotion that she was working hard to control. "And then you walked in. A man with no obligation to this company beyond pushing a cleaning cart. A man with a daughter to feed and rent to pay and every reason in the world to mind his own business. And you did the thing that none of them were willing to do." Darius looked at her for a long moment. "I almost didn't. But you did." "I'm just a janitor, Ms. Hart." "No." Oliver shook her head. "You're a cybersecurity technician who chose a different path because life demanded it. I read your file. I know about your background. I know about Arlington. And I know about your daughter." She reached into her blazer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, which she placed on the shelf beside his cleaning supplies. "I'm restructuring the company, creating a new division, ethics and internal security. Its job will be to make sure that what Carlos Hale did can never happen again. I need someone to lead it. Someone who understands both the technology and the principle behind it. Someone whose first instinct when they see something wrong is to act even when it costs them." Darius looked down at the paper. It was a formal offer letter printed on Apex Nova letterhead with his name at the top. He didn't pick it up. Not right away. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 7. Everything I do, every decision I make, I have to think about how it affects her. Taking a job like this, it's not just about me." Oliver nodded. "I know, and that's exactly why I want you. Because a man who thinks about his daughter before he thinks about himself is the kind of man I need protecting this company." Darius stood there in the basement supply room, surrounded by mop handles and chemical bottles, holding a conversation that would have been unimaginable a month ago. He looked at the offer letter one more time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the chest pocket of his coveralls. "I'll think about it." "Take all the time you need," Oliver said. Then she turned and walked back down the fluorescent hallway, her heels clicking against the concrete, until the sound disappeared. 1 year later, the main auditorium at Apex Nova was full. Every seat was taken, engineers, analysts, support staff executives, and new hires who had joined during the company's resurgence. The stage was simple, a podium, a microphone, and a screen displaying the company's new logo, alongside the words, Apex Nova Annual Address. Oliver walked to the podium. She wore the same black blazer she had worn the night she sat in her office with her eyes closed, though no one in the audience would have known that. She looked out at the crowd and let the room settle. 1 year ago, she began, this company was 47 pages away from ceasing to exist. A bankruptcy filing sat on a conference table upstairs waiting for my signature. Most of you didn't know that. Some of you suspected it. And a few of you were already updating your resumes. A quiet ripple of recognition moved through the audience. We survived. Not because of a new strategy or a market correction or a lucky break. We survived because one person did something extraordinary, and he did it when no one was watching. Oliver looked down at the podium for a moment, collecting herself. For 3 weeks before that board meeting, I conducted a private test. Every night I sat in my office with an access log displayed on my screen, a log that showed clear evidence of a data breach at the highest level of this company. I closed my eyes and waited to see who would walk through that door and what they would do. The auditorium was completely still. Senior leaders came and went. People with decades of experience in cybersecurity, people whose entire job was to detect exactly what was on that screen, walked past it without a second glance. Some of them saw it and chose to ignore it. Some of them didn't even look. Oliver straightened. And then at 2:03 in the morning, a man walked in. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't on the board. He wasn't anyone whose name appeared on a single organizational chart in this building. He was a night shift janitor, a single father who had every reason in the world to keep his head down and walk away. She looked toward the third row. He didn't walk away. He looked at that screen and he understood what it meant. And then he risked everything, his job, his income, the stability of his daughter's life to do what was right. He filed a report that led directly to the FBI investigation that saved this company. Oliver's voice carried through the silent room. The person who passed the test that night wasn't someone with a corner office or a 6-figure salary. It wasn't someone with a title or a seat at this table. It was a man named Darius Cole. Every head in the auditorium turned. Darius sat in the third row wearing a dark gray suit, the first suit he had owned in 3 years. His posture was straight, his hands resting on his knees, his face carrying the quiet composure of a man who had spent a long time learning how to be still in uncomfortable moments. Beside him in the seat to his right, Zoe sat with her legs dangling above the floor, wearing a yellow dress and 2 pigtails, looking up at her father with a smile that hadn't left her face since they walked through the front door that morning. "Darius," Oliver said from the stage, "would you stand up?" He rose slowly. The auditorium was silent. Not the silence of discomfort, but the silence that comes when a room full of people recognizes something true. Darius stood there in his suit, his daughter's small hand reaching up to grab the edge of his jacket, and he looked out at a sea of faces that were for the first time looking back at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. For 2.5 years, he had moved through this building like a shadow, a man without a name tag that anyone read, without a face that anyone remembered, without a voice that anyone expected to hear. He had mopped floors and emptied trash cans and pushed his cart through hallways where people stepped around him the way they stepped around furniture. And now he was standing in the center of the room, and every person in it knew his name. Zoe tugged on his jacket and whispered loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Daddy, why is everyone looking at you?" Darius looked down at his daughter, at her bright eyes and her yellow dress, and the gap where her front tooth used to be, and he felt something shift inside him, not a crack this time, but a settling, like a foundation finding solid ground after years of floating. "Because they can see me, baby," he said quietly. "They can finally see me." The applause started slowly, 1 person, then 10, then the entire room, and it washed over Darius like warm water, filling in all the places that grief and invisibility had hollowed out. Titles don't define a person's worth. Integrity does. And sometimes the person who changes everything isn't the one sitting in the corner office. It's the one who walks in at 2 in the morning with a cleaning cart and a conscience and chooses to do what's right when the whole world is asleep. If this story stayed with you, if Darius's choice reminded you of something you believe in, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, because every week we bring you stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when no one is watching. Hit that notification bell so you never miss one. We'll see you in the next story.